One thing I'd like to touch on that I didn't really get into this morning. I'm talking about how anything that shows up in your experience is unresolvable, is infinite. And it may be easy to form the mistaken notion that this somehow involves some vagueness, out or making it blurry or something like this. It's exactly the opposite. Looking at your experience, it's more and more clear what it is, and the more thoroughly you engage with it. It's the details, it's the subtlety it is that reveals its true nature. So beware of falling into the notion of, you have to sort of space out or get vague or get somehow new agey to say, oh, it's all infinite. It's like, no, you look very precisely at exactly what is present. And when I say look, it implies the visual field, but anywhere in your experience whatsoever, you can examine the phenomenon the same way. The closer you look, the more clearly it is revealed to be infinite and unresolvable. So I wanted to get that in.
No question.
What a surprise.
So I did drugs the other day.
Right? Good for you.
Yeah, Charlie, he didn't come through for me, but my friend, he came through with some mushrooms.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. And seen certain things on that experience. So it was like there was this tension between a sort of a calculating, right? A sort of it's like a survival-driven or comfort-driven calculating, like calculating, doing this, doing that, right? And then like a more immediate, more direct, in enjoying what was happening, right? It was like that. There was this one moment in the experience where, like I noticed this really, right? And well, everything was quite beautiful. It was, we were on this nice hike, and just everything was green and the hills and whatever. But I noticed these ferns, and it seemed like, or my story was, they're kind of like raising their hands up to the sun god or something like that, praising, just kind of like so grateful for, like, and asking for, like, to be connected to which they were, essentially, like that sort of energetic hum.
Right.
And I felt that at the moment, and it's just like this pure enjoyment of that.
Right.
Like it's just kind of like I felt like it's like there's a way in which I can put my attention on that, right, and just enjoy myself very easily, and even kind of like even enjoy like the sensation of fear or something like that, you know, and just the sensual quality of it, right, just the pure energetic quality, right, or like I can focus on like this sort of external story of what's going on, right, and calculate from that perspective, right. So, any response to that? Or?
Yeah, of course. We were talking about that a bit this morning, and you and I have spoken about it on many occasions. There can seem to be the coexistence of these two worlds that are both present. One is the world of an interpretive framework, where things seem to be a certain way, and you're strategizing and navigating within it and defining what's going on and defining who you are and defining what you need to do or what you might be able to do and so on and so forth. And pure presence, the world of just this is. And they both coexist. You can't stop either one of them. You can't shut them down. That's great. It's good to notice that. And especially it's good to notice how they're distinct. They don't overlap. The real let's say the starting point of spirituality where you're clueless really consists of thinking all this is one and thinking that it is what you think it is. So, we're really here, and this is really San Rafael, and we're really at Open Ticket Bookstore, and this is really a spiritual talk, and we really have no clue what the heck the talk's about, and so on and so forth. And it's all sort of just one thing, it's just that. But then, as you say, in your experience, it's more like it's a coexistence of two different sort of dimensions or realms. The one of this actual just thisness in all of its richness and glory and implication without ever being this or that. It just and simultaneously the world of but I'm just here and this is happening and that's happening and I need to do such and such and so on and so forth. And here they are. But the point is not that one is better than the other. The point is not to stop doing one or suppress doing one or move from one to the other. The point is to notice this, and then they basically have nothing to do with each other except for their coexistence. In other words, the most difficult condition is to think that things really are the way you interpret them. So here's the world of that's this actual presence, and I think it's this, that, and the other, and that's one thing. But when you begin to see that they're distinct, then you're free to notice that, well, I'm qualifying this and this and that, but simultaneously, this is here and it's available, it's obvious. Side of the conditions of the interpreted framework, the interpreted viewpoint. So then you can, observe that more directly without preconceptions, because your preconceptions are over here in your interpretation.
In terms of ease, artfulness, like your artfulness in your experience, don't you sort of pay a little bit more attention to one than the other, or? Yeah.
It's like there's sound, there's light, there's touch, and they coexist. And I may, one or the other may come to the forefront as it seems relevant in my engagement at any given time. But it's irrelevant, it's unimportant whether it does or not. When you're, and again, this depends on where you're at, on where in your personal unfoldment, in your personal path of development, if you want to call it that. I cringe. It's important to become very familiar with the undefined. Now, depending on how familiar you are with that, you can see that you are it, you are one with it, you are embedded in it, and it is completely beyond the definable, the realm of these narrations. And you can begin, the next phase would be to begin to notice the way in which the narrations actually just appear spontaneously, irrationally, just like the presence appears irrationally and spontaneously, that they aren't actually antagonistic. They're just different dimensions that coexist. And then you begin to notice there's all kinds of different dimensions that coexist. And none of them really have much to do with any of the others except in their coexistence, in their synchronicity. And that's what realization looks like. you know, the manifest presence of infinite, of inconceivable transcendence, period. And some of these dimensions look like narration and limitation, and some of them look like this, and some of them look like that, and some of them look like blah, 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 but who gives a shit? Because you can't pin it down anyway, and it's all dancing around and morphing, and, you know, you don't even need the mushrooms anymore.
If one is still feeling sort of cold, or feeling like these two dimensions are a little bit antagonistic, you know, and one feels a sort of pull of investment towards like definability and
Right.
calculation.
Doesn't matter at all. Don't worry about it. Tension dimension. None of these dimensions each other necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
They just coexist. It's just a big mishmash. It's just endless weirdness. There's no coherence. It's just weird shit happening with other weird shit. Technical term. I don't know how to say that in Sanskrit, but if I did, I would.
It's very beautiful.
Yeah.
Did you say it in English?
No
speak English.
So it's like that I was saying about enjoying the sensation of fear. Like so there was one point where me and my friend were walking along, and these pigeons or birds, whatever, they got startled and flew up from the trees that were above. And then I got startled, and I kind of like felt like I wanted to fight them or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
My friend thought that was very funny, right? and he was like talking about like enjoying surprise, right? Whereas like I don't know, I still like and that sounds to me kind of like sort of translating the one sort of dimension into the other, right? Of like.
Maybe, but let's look at it. The solution is always to see. The solution is not to solve. So if there's tension present, look at the tension. What's tension? What is that? What, you know? And all of a sudden you discover something transcendental. There's no way you can wrap your head around. If there's startlement, what is startlement? Ah! What was that? What is it? What's startlement? You can't say. You can't say what anything is, so.
There's one other part of the another part of that experience that I want to talk about. Like so there was like I'm a little bit neurotic about health and stuff.
You? No.
We're talking about plant toxins or something last time, you know. And with experience, I'm a little bit peer pressured into doing it, but I'm like, whatever. And thought I could get some benefit. And so like, you know, the first like 2 hours, like I'm feeling like, oh, my organs are unhappy processing these fungus toxins. Right? And I'm like, you know, making the calculation of was this really worthwhile, right? And then, but whatever, past like the midpoint, like there was like this, it was like this this minty freshness feeling around my organs, you know, like they're very happy, it seemed, you know. And it was
nothing like a happy organ.
Yeah, can't beat it, right?
Right.
And so it was almost like my interpretation is that like it's almost like in the experience I get sort of in tune with, in contact with just like this pure resonant level of experience, right? And it's almost like my normal neurotic way of being is sort of like with all the interpreting and so on. It's like tying myself up into knots. It's just kind of like it's almost like the story is like the mushrooms sort of taught my system to be like in harmonious relationship with itself.
Sure.
So
this and the important point of this is not the harmony or the disharmony. It's not the interpreting the toxins and having sort of an orientation about that and losing that. The important point is noticing how it's always drifting and always morphing and always seems different and becomes something else and becomes something else and becomes something else endlessly. Down and it's still seeming something else, and then you go to sleep and it seems something else, and then you dream and it seems something else, and then you wake up and it seems something else, and you come over here and it seems something else. There's no one way that it is. Just a cascade of seemings. And then there's nothing to grasp after. And even if there's grasping, it's just more of the cascade of seemings, and it's going to move on, whatever, morph into something else weird. There's no stability. There's no way that this is. It is exactly what it is, but that is not any particular way. It's however it happens to be. And the way that it happens to be is not what you think it is, because it is infinite. It isn't any particular way. It's already something else. It's the ultimate mirage. It's the ultimate slipperiness. It's always receding. It's always vanishing. It's always unfindable. And it is always completely explicit and clear. Very, very strange, very paradoxical. In Dzogchen, they have a saying, if you look for it and don't find it, you've found it. Because its very nature is the unfindable.
maybe it is kind of like I keep on looking for the one way that it is.
Yes, you do. You think that's what you're doing. You think that's what you're doing. It's just a story that comes and goes. Sometimes you forget. I mean, this is the nature of hell. This is the very essence of samsara, is to think that there's something to find and to pursue it. And the very essence of liberation and enlightenment is just absolutely nothing that can be achieved or lost. And you already have and are all of it.
And it's already saying too much to talk about like a enjoyment of riding the now, or like surfing the now or something.
No harm, no foul. It's all good. I enjoy surfing the now. Or don't enjoy surfing the now. That's fun too. or be torn with tension between whether you enjoy it or whether you don't enjoy it. That's fun too. It's all good. You can just dance around. You can just dance around like crazy, like usual. And what do you have? What is it? Weirdness. Endless weirdness. You can't find endless weirdness. You can't lose endless weirdness. It's just what you got.
I believe you are not denying that reality get different shape,
Right.
but what you claiming, you cannot say when one shape is start and one
Right.
finish.
Correct. It's infinitely, it never comes into a particular state, because even as it starts to come in, even as it comes into a state, it's already some other state. It's very, very strange, very paradoxical. It's not like it's like this now, and then it's like this now, and then it's like this now, like the pages of a book or a movie. It's like a river flowing, you know. Whatever shape it is, it's already another shape, because it never stops.
Without the shape, nothing.
Yeah.
It's like between two thoughts.
Yeah, but see, between two thoughts is a myth. It's a fantasy. Because thoughts don't have edges. They don't have beginnings. They don't have ends. Thought is just an endless flow.
So nothing is fallacy, nothing is nothing. Shape, no shape.
No thing is as true as anything, as true as something, and they're all. The actual truth is beyond that. Everything is true, partially, let's say, but the actuality is way more than that. That's the transcendence. So sure, there's nothing here, but sure, there's all this, but there's nothing here. It's a paradox. So you try to pin it down to this, but then what about that? You know, and it is. You know, it is this, it is that, it is nothing, it is everything. You know, it's action. It's nothing happening. There's no action whatsoever. It's you can't say. It's a paradox.
So what is the limitation that you can see clearly your experience thought one, thought two, and nothing between for experience? What is the limitation of perceiver?
It's thinking that it is that way and not looking carefully enough to notice that it isn't that way. Thoughts, conceptually, thoughts define themselves as separate, but thoughts aren't concepts. Thoughts are energy presence, let's call it. Just like light is energy presence, sound is energy presence. Thoughts pretend to be concepts. Like I say, I'm saying this, and it sounds like I saying this. It sounds like three things and they're separate. But it's not really like that. It's an endless cascade that seems to break itself up into this, that, and that, but it doesn't really. So if you have to look very carefully and sensitively, without preconception, and then you see it's a flow. And even that it's a flow is not true. It's weirder than that.
We cannot define form and formlessness. It's
No.
always.
You can't define anything. But nothing is canceled out. Sure, there's obviously formlessness, but you can't find form, and you can't find formlessness. It's very strange.
So what about sitting in silence?
Well, you can pretend to, but what does that mean, silence? It means sitting. And what does it mean in? I'm not being facetious. I mean that really closely. When is there silence? Is there anything other than silence? There's always this presents. Your experience presents with infinite dimensions. Many of those dimensions are like silence. Many of those dimensions are like constant vibration. Many of those dimensions are like flashings. Many of those dimensions, they have all different textures and they all coexist and come forth and recede in various ways. So if you're pretending you're going to be in one of those, you're playing a game with yourself, because in actuality, they're all present to whatever degree they are, dynamically and very evanescently.
So I guess further than the question, if I hear what you're saying, but so many people who seemingly are enlightened say that you can sit in silence.
Well, sitting in silence is fine.
And that's kind of a stage, it can be a stage moving toward seeing this.
Sure. It is a stage. Anything is a stage of moving towards it. Sitting in silence is fine. If you like to sit in silence, by all means, sit in silence. But the seeing this constitutes a discovery that sitting in silence is not sitting in silence, it's this. And getting up and yelling and screaming is not getting up and yelling and screaming, it's this. And going to sleep is not going to sleep, it's this. And so on and so forth. And yet, the apparent stages in coming to see that may look like whatever they look like. They may look like sitting in silence. They may look like being a warrior. They may look like whatever. I mean, whatever it looks like is what it looks like. What it looks like isn't really that, because what it truly is cannot be said, because it's always this. And when you see that, that's when you realize, that's when you see what it is. But and you're always free to do whatever you want. Remember, I was saying earlier, it does not matter what you do. So you sit in silence, you don't sit in silence, it's all good. The point is the seeing. The seeing is what's powerful in any context. And what is seen, by its very nature, transcends the context in which it seems to be happening. So if you're sitting in silence and you see what it is, it's vastly beyond sitting in silence. Running around obsessed with things and, being neurotic, and you see what it is vastly beyond that description. And you see the same thing in both cases, because there's only one thing to actually see if you're truly seeing. Not that it resolves to actually being a coherent one. When I say one thing, I'm saying infinite weirdness, which comes in infinite flavors, so good luck. To try and talk about this stuff ends up sounding like gibberish and paradox, because it is. From a logical point of view, what this is and the way it is what it is complete gibberish, complete nonsense. It's way beyond through the looking glass.
How you can claim each moment in infinite dimension, but you cannot experience even 5 dimensions? You can see what
you do. No, the 5 dimensions and 4 dimensions is a rational construct, but experience is not rational. Experience exists beyond space and time. Most of your experience is not spatial. So to talk about, 4 or 5 dimensions where you're thinking, analytically, you're thinking conceptually, none of those dimensions actually exist. They're defined into existence by an analytical way of describing. But experience itself is amorphous.
So it's limitation of instrument, the mind, the brain, limitation of the instrument, the tool. Instrument.
Oh, no, it's not about the instrument. It's about the concept of the instrument. There is no instrument. There seems to be an instrument can appear, and it can be interpreted that way. So there's all of these colors and shapes and sounds and textures appearing in experience. You can look at all of that and take a certain small section of these colors and say, everything inside this line is me, is my instrument, and everything outside the line is not. Sense fields and say, well, everything that's here is what's perceiving the light, and so on and so forth. But all of that is an abstraction, conceptually defined from the raw field of experience, which is an inseparable continuum.
So my conceptual is limited.
Yes, conceptual is limited, and that limited conceptual pretends to be about the unlimited actual, but of course it fails because it's limited.
But conceptualization is not experience?
Yes, conceptualization is experience, but the presence of conceptualization is experience. The content of conceptualization, which is also experience, is not accurate. A story, a novel, a fiction. You can have a story, you can read the story of, Red Riding Hood or something. It doesn't mean that there's a Red Riding Hood and a wolf somewhere in a forest and they're walking through. It's a fiction. It doesn't exist. The story exists. The idea exists. The narration of it exists, maybe, if it does. But it has no truth. The concepts pretend to claim to be about something, but there's nothing that they're about. Every concept the mind can have is not about anything. Concepts do not refer to actuality. They claim to, they pretend to, and they do in a very vague, loose, sloppy sense, but they do not accurately refer to actuality, to the true condition of what is.
Therefore, yoga cannot be conceptual.
No, cannot be. But conceptual, being with conceptual is a useful way to discover that truth, to discover that conceptual is inaccurate. Yes, yoga is not conceptual, it's experiential. And experience, you aren't seeing light because you're thinking you're seeing light. You're seeing light because you actually are. You're the thinking that it's light, but the seeing is it's a mystery. It's just here. You didn't do it on purpose. You don't put the light in by thinking about it or by defining it. It's just mystery. It's just here. The thought is just here. Such is just here.
How you explain the pi? Is it conceptual, but is it infinite too at the same time?
Well, it's literally, it's even conceptually infinite, but no, it's conceptual. You see, there's no actual circle and there's no actual diameter. The circle is defined into existence. You can say, oh, but look, this is a circle. It's not a circle. Conceptual thing is defined into existence. Suppose you define a different circle into existence that has 367.5 degrees. What do you do with that? Well, it's a whole new math system. But math is defined into existence. It doesn't necessarily have a correlation with anything else. It may be useful provisionally for dealing with other things, but it isn't actually like that. It's parallel, but not actually the same thing. So I can approximate the relationship between a real world diameter and a real world circle, but it's not an actual circle, it's not an actual diameter, and it's definitely an approximation because there's no precision. With quantum phenomena, there's no precision. No matter how precisely you measure, the whole thing is it's alive. It's not precisely here. There's no here. Here is, it's all over the place.
Peter, you're talking about how the determinate frameworks that don't actually relate to something. They exist in their own kind of domain, but they don't really relate to actuality.
Well,
but I just want to just explore a little bit.
They relate partially. They aren't wholly divorced from actuality, but they don't capture actuality.
Right.
They may be provisionally useful for certain modes of engagement, but they are useless for discovering the nature of actuality because occasion in every regard.
I think what's interesting is that these different dimensions of experience, to use those words like light and sound, let's say. So I have a label for this, if you will, aspect of reality called light.
Sure.
And then I have a label for sound, this other aspect of reality. So it's fascinating how if you go to find either of those things, you come up empty-handed.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So how is it that the intelligence like, if light is not referring to something, because there isn't something evolvable to refer to,
Right.
what the hell is it referring to?
Exactly.
That's not the right answer.
No, that was a good answer. But it's curious because we make distinctions, or consciousness makes, like, light is light, it's not sound,
Yeah.
right?
Really?
Well, I don't know, it's a curious.
It's very curious.
It's a curious thing.
Curiouser and curiouser, as she says.
Applies to any different sort of dimension that we might describe
Yes.
conceptually or linguistically.
Yes.
That it's like what, some state that is, apparating, appearing, that we might refer to as tired, conceptually or linguistically. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
Well, it seems distinct from energized.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
It does, but I guess that's just the mirage-like nature of it. That
Yeah.
God, it sure looks at one level to be its own actuality, distinct from other actualities.
Yeah. But at the one level is ultimately imaginary level, and that is coherent and that is distinguishable from any other level. So you can say that there's a certain perspective from which this sure looks like it's this, in a way, but then from some other perspective it doesn't. And perspective itself exists and certainly infinitely fluid. So the whole is not in a cage.
So even to say something like reality appears to characterize those language and concepts.
Yeah. All of that can be said, and all of that's very evocative, but none of it's true.
Yeah.
It's not untrue, but it's not true.
Right.
It's true as far as it goes. And then where are you?
Right. In a place that
cannot be said. And as soon as you step over into what cannot be said, where are you? Is there a you? Is there a where? Can't be said. Infinite mystery. It's very strange. The mind keeps trying to draw a dichotomy and finds it, but there must be some this versus some that. I hate to say it. I really hate to say it, but this is non-duality.
Right. It's just wild. I mean, if you look at, the musical example, right, of like the notes of the scale, right, the D is not.
Yeah. You say.
Right. I guess it's just you're left with the paradox of like the appearance is one of differentiation and difference, and C doesn't sound like D, and you listen to them together, and it even sounds different. But is that you go to actually discern what in fact is there, and you just absolutely cannot find it.
You're always left with paradox. There's no other place to arrive because that's where you are. That's the only place you can ever be because there's nothing else. And even paradox isn't really paradox. It's just weirder than that, and weirder than that, and weirder than that.
So where's the limitation?
There's no limitation. Limitation is the fantasy of limitation. Limitation is imagined. And because the mind is so powerful, it can seize on these imaginings and hypnotize itself that maybe they're true and see things that way. And it seems to be true. But if you look closely, it does not stand up to scrutiny.
Peter, can you talk about look closely and say true looking to it, and what is
not true looking?
There is no true looking contrasted with some not true looking. Looking really consists of seeing. And what seeing is can't really be said. But you're always doing it.
You can imagine you're looking and you're just referring to concepts. No?
Sure. And if that's happening, then you can see that.
If you can.
Yeah, if you can. Seeing happens because it is happening. And it happens when it happens. It's, a better word than seeing is perhaps recognition.
Knowing.
Well, we know it gets slippery when you start looking at the implications of distinct words because none of them are true. A useful notion is recognition, which is more than just seeing. It's the aha of insight. Of oh, amazing! It's just that flash of seeing something that is true, that is fundamentally more true than what you were holding it to be.
It doesn't zero out necessarily a certain interpretive framework.
No, not at all. It exists outside the framework of interpretive frameworks. Well, it's much more subtle than that. Interpretive frameworks don't have an inside or an outside. Sort of like stick figures. Not even that. They're very shallow. Interpretive frameworks have no coherence. They're kind of like a movie set. The movie set looks like one thing, but then you peek around the side, and it's all plywood held together with tape. It's not what it seems. It only seems to have coherence if you look at it very carefully from one perspective. But as soon as you look more closely, the whole thing is seen to be a sham. And that itself is an aspect of recognition. So when you see that the interpretive framework has no coherence, you're outside the interpretive framework without needing to be outside it in some, more heavy-handed sense. And that's where recognition occurs.
I guess there's a sense that it's very clear, but sometimes it's
very clear and sometimes it isn't.
It isn't, yeah. or there's a sense that some feedback should be from the interpretive or other dimensions than the interpretive dimension.
Yeah, sure, maybe so, but there's always other dimensions and there's always feedback, and it's all always happening. So recognition is a strange paradox. Recognition is always happening, but recognition per se comes from recognizing that recognition is always happening. And then you're on the recognition train until you seem to be not. And then you wonder what happened even though nothing happened. That's really helpful, isn't it? It's not something you do, and you can't be methodical about it. You just do it anyway. Just see. Right now.
It has to be in the now. Otherwise, you're referring to.
Of course, obviously. You are seeing this, and then bang, you're off and running. Oh yeah, sure, we're here sitting in this room. What the fuck is he talking about? Blah blah blah, and then just see. And again, this, it's like a game of cat and mouse. It can look like, and you're going in and out and dancing and struggling with it and cursing. But eventually it develops into some kind of a apparent insight and just a recognition, a sort of a palpability that, wow, there's something really strange here. And then that becomes the aspect of the recognition and so on and so forth. It feeds on itself irrationally.
So any effect that it has, if it has, I don't know if that's even effect is an interpretive framework. On your modes of engagement and coming from a more limited interpretive framework.
Yeah.
That just sneaks on you whenever it does.
Yeah, exactly. And a major part of the recognition is noticing that that happens from time to time. Right? Yeah. And it's all good, but the thing about recognition is it builds on itself. This is the amazing, fortunate fact of the practice of yoga, is every flash of recognition builds on the previous one. You never have to go over old ground. It's like building a tower to the moon. Every grain of sand you put on makes it higher. And makes it
Is that
higher.
something you're aware of?
What? Who's who? What? Where?
No, I mean, in the practice of yoga.
Oh, you may or may not be aware, but ultimately you become very aware. Yoga is very strange because it doesn't seem to be working. Yoga works under the table.
Yeah.
It's not explicit. It's implicit. It's not rational. It makes no sense, and you don't even know it's happening. But something's happening. And you don't know what it is, do you, Mr. Jones? And that just becomes more and more explicitly the case, ultimately.
Would you say that reference occurs synchronistically with what it's pretending to refer to?
Maybe. I mean, what does exactly the synchronistic mean? There seems to be synchronism and coexistence. And there's certainly synchronism in the sense that everything is about everything else and everything is everything else. But again, when you look more, when you try and pin, like if I tried to answer your question more and more precisely, it becomes more and more obvious that it's impossible to answer precisely because it's not findable. It doesn't collapse down into being that way or not. I mean, you could say this is a very, very, very roughly speaking, sure. In a certain sense, there's nothing but synchronicity. But, you know, that doesn't hold a lot of water because you look closely and it's like, what was I talking about? What's that about? What's synchronized with what? You know, the whole thing is, it's a mirage. You never find anything. Whatever your starting point is, if you look at what is present, it vanishes. Your starting point vanishes. And it may seem to assume a new guise, but you look at that and that vanishes. And you continue, the path of yoga is you continue doing that until there's nothing left. Nothing is negated. There's nothing left anymore, but everything's here. Go figure.
It seems the problem starts because you want to explain the experience.
Yes.
So
Sorry?
we need to give up explain the experience.
Yes, exactly. That's the problem. Good luck. Can't be done. And the only way to do it, lying, to start oversimplifying, to start spin doctoring. And that's exactly what people do. That's exactly what the mind does.
So even yoga cannot explain that.
No way. Into which in effect is melting into. You achieve the effect of melting into it without needing to bother to do any of that pesky melting.
Does explaining help at all internally or not?
It can be a useful way to tie yourself in knots to see the hopelessness of explaining. It's best engaged with to enable it to self-destruct by jamming it with inconceivability. It's like telling a computer to divide by zero. Computer goes,
So in this case, we can clear the explaining is disease of spirituality. It's kind of disease.
Yeah, well, it's the opposite. It's not a disease. You're free to do it, to see what it is, to see that it's just a game that is impossible. And when you see that, then you're still free to do it, but you don't get trapped by it. You don't get seduced into thinking, into the arrogance of supposing, oh, I can explain everything, then I'll, whatever. It's just not true. It's not true. Why don't we take a 5-minute break? One of our famous 15-minute long 5-minute breaks.